everyone, welcome to our next chapter of Indirect Tax course. So far, we have covered what GST is, what constitutes a supply, chargeability and valuation. Now we tackle one of the most practically important topics, exemptions from GST. This chapter is large because there are many categories of exempt supplies. I will keep each section crisp and to the point. Let us get started. This chapter has two broad objectives. First, understanding the government's power to grant exemptions under GST, the legal framework under Section 11 of the CGST Act and Section 6 of the IGST Act. Second, analyzing the various categories of services that are exempt from GST through Notification 12/2017 Central Tax Rate. These cover charitable and religious activities, agriculture, education, healthcare, government services, transport, banking, insurance, and many more. Any supply of goods or services that falls within the charging section is chargeable to GST. However, before concluding that GST is payable on a supply, you must always check whether that supply qualifies for any exemption notified under GST laws. This exemption check is essential to determine the actual tax liability. Exemptions are not automatic. They are specifically notified by the government, and you must match your supply against the notified list. GST does not apply in four broad situations. 1. Exclusion from definition of supply. Certain transactions under Section 7, 2 and Schedule 3 are outside the definition of supply entirely. For example, services rendered by an employee to their employer in the course of employment. 2. Non-applicability of the charging section. Section 9(1) excludes alcoholic liquor for human consumption from GST altogether. 3. Supply by non-taxable persons. Persons below the registration threshold are not taxable persons, so their supplies fall outside GST. 4. Exemption. Notified by government under Section 11 of CGST Act and Section 6 of IGST Act, the government can exempt specific supplies by notification. An exempt supply under Section 247 is any supply of goods, services, or both that either attracts a nil rate of tax or is wholly exempt from tax under the CGST Act or IGST Act. It also includes non-taxable supply. A non-taxable supply under Section 278 is a supply that is simply not leviable to tax under the CGST Act or IGST Act. For example, alcoholic liquor for human consumption. The distinction matters for ITC reversal purposes. Exempt supplies are tracked separately in ITC calculations. Under Section 11(1) of the CGST Act and the parallel Section 6 of the IGST Act, the government may, in public interest, based on the recommendations of the GST Council, by notification, exempt goods or services of any specified description, either absolutely or subject to conditions, from whole or any part of the tax, with effect from a specified date. Under Section 11(2), in exceptional circumstances, the government may, by a special order in each case, not by a general notification, exempt any goods or services from payment of tax. So Section 11(1) is for general category exemptions via notification, and Section 11(2) is for exceptional case-by-case exemptions via special order. The explanation to Section 11 contains two important points. First, any explanation issued by the government is deemed to have been part of the original notification from its very beginning. It has retrospective effect. Second, and very importantly, if an exemption from whole or part of the tax has been granted absolutely, the registered supplier shall not collect tax in excess of the effective rate. So if GST is exempt or reduced on a supply, the supplier cannot charge the old higher rate from customers. Collecting more than the exempted effective rate is not permitted. The government has issued two landmark notifications granting GST exemptions. Notification 02/2017 Central Tax Rate dated 28 June 2017 exempt supplies of around 149 items of goods. Examples include electricity, salt, fresh fruits, plastic bangles, and passenger baggage. Notification 12/2017 Central Tax Rate dated 28 June 2017 exempts specified services from GST. This second notification is what we will spend the bulk of this chapter on, going category by category through the exempt services. Entry 1 of Notification 12/2017 exempts at nil rate services by an entity registered under Section 12AA or 12AB of the Income Tax Act by way of charitable activities. What are charitable activities? They cover public health activities such as care or counseling of terminally ill persons, HIV/AIDS patients, persons addicted to drugs, prisoners, and persons over 65 years in rural areas, public awareness on preventive health, family planning and HIV prevention, advancement of religion, spirituality or yoga, educational programs for abandoned or orphaned children and abused persons, and preservation of the environment, including watersheds, forests, and wildlife. Only activities falling within this defined list qualify for the exemption. Three important clarifications here. First, hostel accommodation provided by trusts to students does not fall within the definition of charitable activities. It is taxable. Second, unless specifically exempted, all goods and services supplied to charitable or religious trusts are subject to GST. Third, religious, yoga or meditation programs, fees charged for such programs meant for advancement of religion, spirituality or yoga are exempt, including residential camps with lodging and boarding, provided the primary objective is religion or yoga. However, if a trust primarily provides accommodation or food against consideration, that is taxable. Activities like fitness camps, aerobics, or music classes are also taxable. Entry 13 exempts two services at nil rate. Part A, services for conduct of any religious ceremony, exempt with no conditions. Part B, renting of precincts of a religious place meant for general public, owned or managed by an entity or trust registered under Section 12AA, 12AB or Section 1023C, 5 of the Income Tax Act, or a body covered under Section 1023BBA. However, renting is excluded from exemption when room rent is 1000 rupees per day or more, premises or halls or open areas are 10,000 rupees per day or more, or shops or commercial spaces are 10,000 rupees per month or more. Below these thresholds, the renting is exempt. Also, only the conduct of religious ceremonies and renting of religious precincts are covered. Any other activity is taxable regardless of what it is called. Entry 60 exempt services by a specified organization in respect of religious pilgrimages facilitated by the Government of India under a bilateral arrangement. The specified organizations are Kumaon Mandal Vikas Nigam Limited KMVN, the Hajj Committee of India, and State Hajj Committees. Nil rate, no conditions. Entry 80 exempts two types of training: services by an individual for training or coaching in recreational activities relating to arts or culture, exempt at nil rate, and coaching in sports by charitable entities registered under Section 12AA or 12AB, also exempt. No conditions for either. Entry 54 of Notification 12/2017 exempts at nil rate a wide range of services relating to cultivation of plants and rearing of animals, excluding horses, for food, fiber, fuel, raw material or agricultural produce. The exempt services include agricultural operations directly related to production, including cultivation, harvesting, threshing, plant protection and testing, supply of farm labor, processes at an agricultural farm such as tending, pruning, drying, fumigating, sorting, grading, cooling and bulk packaging, but only if these do not alter the essential characteristics of the produce and make it marketable only for the primary market. Renting or leasing of agro machinery or vacant land, loading, unloading, packing, storage or warehousing of agricultural produce, agricultural extension services, and services by any agricultural produce, marketing committee or board or commission agents for sale or purchase of agricultural produce. The critical rule for entry 54 exemption: the process must maintain the essential characteristics of the agricultural produce and must make it marketable only for the primary market, not the retail market. Two types of processes are outside entry 54. First, processes that alter essential characteristics. For example, processing potatoes into potato chips or tomatoes into tomato ketchup. These change the fundamental nature of the produce. Second, processes that make agricultural produce marketable in the retail market. For example, grinding, sterilizing, extraction, or retail ready packaging. Keep this principle in mind. Primary market ready equals exempt, retail market ready equals taxable. Agricultural extension services refer to the application of scientific research and knowledge to agricultural practices through farmer education or training. The key objectives are dissemination of technical know-how to farmers about the latest scientific advancements in agriculture and enhancing farmer knowledge about crop techniques and innovative methods to improve productivity. These services are covered within entry 54 and are exempt from GST. Three important examples here. Tea, black, green, white. Tea undergoes drying, rolling, shaping, oxidation and packing in factories, which alters the essential characteristics of green tea leaves. Hence, processed tea is not agricultural produce. Only green tea leaves are agricultural produce eligible for exemption. Coffee. Roasted coffee beans and coffee powder are processed products. not agricultural produce. Raw coffee beans are agricultural produce. Jaggery. Processing sugarcane into jaggery changes its essential characteristics. Jaggery is not considered agricultural produce. The lesson: once the essential characteristics of the original agricultural commodity change through processing, it ceases to be agricultural produce. Continuing the theme of what is not agricultural produce. Dehusk it or split pulses such as dal. The process of dehusking or splitting is carried out by pulse millers, not farmers, and it alters the natural form of pulses. So dehusked or split pulses are not agricultural produce. However, whole pulses like whole gram and rajma are agricultural produce. Processed spices and dry fruits, processes like drying, refining or grinding alter their essential characteristics. Such processed spices and dry fruits are not agricultural produce. Several additional agricultural exemptions. Entry 24. Loading, unloading, packing, storage or warehousing of rice, nil rate. Entry 24A. Warehousing of minor forest produce, nil rate. Entry 24B. Storage or warehousing of cereals, pulses, fruits and vegetables, nil rate. Entry 55. Intermediate production process as job work for cultivation of plants and rearing of animals, excluding horses for food, fiber, fuel or agricultural produce, nil rate. Entry 55A. Services by way of artificial insemination of livestock other than horses, nil rate. Important note: milling of paddy into rice is not an intermediate production process. It is done after cultivation is complete by rice millers, not cultivators, and it changes paddy's essential characteristics into rice. Hence, milling of paddy is not exempt under entry 55. Entry 66 Part A exempts at nil rate services provided by an educational institution to its students, faculty and staff. Entry 66 Part EAA also exempts services by way of conduct of entrance examinations against consideration in the form of entrance fee, nil rate. An educational institution is defined as one providing preschool education and education up to higher secondary school or equivalent, education as part of a curriculum for obtaining a qualification recognized by any law, or education as part of an approved vocational education course. This definition is precise. If an institution does not fall within it, it cannot claim this exemption. An approved vocational education course covers two types. First, courses run by ITEs or ITCs. These institutions must be affiliated with the National Council for Vocational Training, NCVT, or the State Council for Vocational Training, SCVT, and the courses must be in designated trades notified under the Apprentices Act, 1961. Second, modular employable skill, MES courses. These are courses approved by the NCVT and conducted by individuals or organizations registered with the Directorate General of Training under the Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship. Several important clarifications. Private coaching centers or unrecognized institutions do not qualify as educational institutions since they do not result in a recognized qualification. They are taxable. Only courses recognized under Indian law are covered. Education for qualifications recognized under foreign law is not exempt. Private ITI services are only exempt for designated trades under the Apprentices Act. Other trades are taxable. Lodging and boarding provided by preschool to higher secondary institutions is fully exempt from GST. Services by a private ITI for non-designated trades are liable to GST. Boarding schools. The composite supply of education plus lodging and food is exempt because the principal supplies education. The entire composite is exempt. Any authority established by the central or state government, including the National Testing Agency, for conducting entrance exams is treated as an educational institution for purposes of conducting those exams. IIM programs, long duration programs of 1 year or more are exempt. Short-term executive programs of less than 1 year are not exempt since participants are not students and the programs do not lead to a legally recognized qualification. Campus recruitment fees charged by IITs, IIMs, and similar institutions are liable to GST. Entry 66B also exempts certain services provided to educational institutions. Transportation of students, faculty and staff, nil rate, but only for institutions providing education up to higher secondary level. Catering including midday meals sponsored by central or state government, nil rate, again only up to higher secondary level. Security, cleaning and housekeeping services, nil rate, up to higher secondary level. Services relating to admission or conduct of examinations, nil rate for all educational institutions, no restriction. Supply of online educational journals or periodicals, nil rate, but this exemption does not apply to preschool, higher secondary, or approved vocational institutions. It is available only to degree level and above institutions. Entry 46 exempt services by a veterinary clinic in relation to healthcare of animals or birds, nil rate, no conditions. Entry 74 exempts healthcare services by a clinical establishment, an authorized medical practitioner or paramedics, nil rate. However, there is an important exclusion: room charges exceeding 5,000 rupees per day, other than ICU, CCU, ICCU or NICU, are not exempt. Also exempt transportation of patients in an ambulance. Healthcare services means any service related to diagnosis, treatment, or care for illness, injury, deformity, abnormality, or pregnancy in any recognized system of medicine in India. Recognized systems include allopathy, yoga, naturopathy, Ayurveda, homeopathy, Siddha, Unani, and any other system recognized by the central government. Hair transplant and cosmetic or plastic surgery are excluded unless medically necessary. This is a practically important table. Food supplied to inpatients as advised by doctors or nutritionists, part of composite healthcare supply, not taxable. Food supplied to patients who are not admitted, taxable as a separate supply. Food supplied to attendants or visitors, taxable. Food prepared by hospital-run canteens for inpatients, exempt when included in healthcare services. Food outsourced by hospitals from caterers. The caterer charges GST on their supply, and the hospital cannot claim ITC on such outsourced catering. Remember the key principle. Food for admitted patients on medical advice is part of healthcare, exempt. Everything else is taxable. Entry 4 and 5. Services by a governmental authority in relation to functions entrusted to a municipality under Article 243W or a Panchayat. Under Article 243G of the Constitution, nil rate, no conditions. Entry 6. Services by the central government, state government, UT or local authority, nil rate. But excluded are GST specified services by Department of Posts, Ministry of Railways in relation to aircraft or vessel inside or outside port or airport premises and transport of goods or passengers, and any service other than specified services provided to business entities. Entry 7. Services by the government to business entities with aggregate turnover below the GST registration threshold in the preceding financial year, nil rate, except the specified services above and renting of immovable property. Entry 8. Services by the government to another government entity, nil rate, except the specified services. Entry 9. Services by the government where the consideration is 5,000 rupees or less, nil rate. For continuous supply of service, the exemption applies only where the consideration for the entire financial year is 5,000 rupees or less. Entry 9C. Services by a government entity to the government or services by a specified person from the government against consideration in the form of grants, nil rate, no conditions. Government grants are therefore not taxable. Entry 9. These services by an old age home run by central or state government or an entity registered under Section 12, AA or 12AB of the Income Tax Act to its residents aged 60 years or more, where the consideration is 25,000 rupees or less per month, inclusive of charges for boarding, lodging and maintenance, nil rate. Entry 9E. Services by Indian Railways to individuals, sale of platform tickets, retiring rooms, waiting rooms, cloakroom services and battery operated car services, nil rate. Entry 9F. Services between different zones or divisions of Indian Railways, nil rate. Entry 9G. Services by special purpose vehicles to Indian Railways for using their infrastructure during the concession period, and maintenance services by Indian Railways to SPV infrastructure, nil rate. Entry 24C. Services by the Department of Posts, postcards, inland letters, book posts, and ordinary post for envelopes weighing 10 grams or less, nil rate. Entry 34A. Loan guarantee services by the government to its undertakings or PSS for loans from banks or financial institutions, nil rate. Entry 42. Services by the government allowing a business entity to operate as a telecom service provider or use radio frequency spectrum prior to 1st April 2016 on payment of license fee or spectrum user charges, nil rate. Entry 47. Services by the government for statutory registration required under any law and testing, calibration or safety certification, including fire licenses required under any law, nil rate. Entry 61. Issuance of passports, visas, driving licenses, birth certificates or death certificates by the government, nil rate. Entry 62. Services by the government by way of tolerating non-performance of a contract where the consideration is fines or liquidated damages payable to the government. Nil rate. Entry 63. Assignment by the government of right to use natural resources to individual farmers for cultivation of plants and rearing of animals excluding horses. Nil rate. Entry 65. Services by government by way of deputing officers after office hours or on holidays for inspection, container stuffing, or other duties related to import-export cargo on payment of merchant overtime charges. Nil rate. Entry 65B exempts services by a state government to an excess royalty collection contractor. ERCC, by way of assigning the right to collect royalty on behalf of the state government on minerals dispatched by mining leaseholders. Nil rate. There is an important condition. At the end of the contract, the ERCC must certify to the state government that the GST paid by mining leaseholders on royalty exceeds the GST exemption granted. If it does not, the ERCC must pay the difference. This is a self-correcting mechanism ensuring revenue neutrality to the government. Entry 74. A exempts services provided by rehabilitation professionals recognized under the Rehabilitation Council of India Act 1992 by way of rehabilitation, therapy or counseling at medical establishments, educational institutions or rehabilitation centers established by the government or by an entity registered under Section 12AA or 12AB of the Income Tax Act. Nil rate, no conditions. This covers professionals such as physiotherapists, occupational therapists, speech therapists, and similar practitioners working at government-backed or registered charitable establishments. Entry 3 and 3A, pure services and composite supplies, where goods are 25% or less of the total value, provided to the government for any function entrusted to a panchayat under Article 243G or a municipality under Article 243W, nil rate. Entry 3B, services provided to a governmental authority for water supply, public health, sanitation, conservancy, solid waste management, and slum improvement, nil rate. Entry 11A, services by fair price shops for sale of food grains, kerosene, sugar, edible oil under the public distribution system, nil rate commission or margin. Entry 40, services under any insurance scheme where the total premium is borne entirely by the government, nil rate. Entry 72, training program services to the government where 75% or more of the total expenditure is borne by the government, nil rate. Entry 10, pure labor contracts for construction, erection, commissioning, installation, completion, repair, maintenance, renovation or alteration of a civil structure or original works pertaining to the beneficiary-led individual house construction under Housing for All, Urban Mission or Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, nil rate. Entry 10A, services by electricity distribution, utilities for construction or installation of infrastructure for extending electricity distribution networks up to farmers' tube wells for agricultural use, nil rate. Entry 11, pure labor contracts for construction or installation of original works pertaining to a single residential unit other than as part of a residential complex, nil rate. Note, these are all pure labor contracts. Supply of goods alongside the service makes it a composite supply and the exemption may not apply. Entry 41 is the services by way of transfer of development rights, TDR, or floor space index, FSI, including additional FSI on or after 1st April 2019 for construction of residential apartments by a promoter intended for sale before construction. Nil rate. Entry 41 B. Upfront amount for long-term lease of 30 years or more on or after 1st April 2019 for construction of residential apartments intended for sale before construction. Nil rate. Important. Where the entire consideration is received after issuance of the completion certificate or first occupation, whichever is earlier, the exemption does not apply. Promoters must pay GST under reverse charge on TDR for unsold residential apartments at the time of completion or first occupation. Tax on unsold units is capped at 0.5% for affordable apartments and 2.5% for other residential apartments. When a promoter receives TDR or FSI for a mixed project, the GST calculation has 3 steps. Step 1. Calculate GST attributable to residential apartments. Multiply total GST on TDR by the ratio of carpet area of residential apartments to total carpet area of the project. This is amount A. Step 2. Calculate GST on unbooked residential apartments. Multiply total GST on TDR by the ratio of carpet area of unsold residential apartments to total carpet area of all residential apartments. This is amount B. Step 3. The GST exemption equals A minus B. In simple terms, the exemption covers booked residential apartments. The promoter pays GST only on the TDR portion attributable to unsold units. Entry 15 provides nil rate exemptions for passenger transportation in 3 cases. First, air travel in economy class to and from airports in the northeast states. Arunachal Pradesh, Assam, Manipur, Meghalaya, Mizoram, Nagaland, Sikkim, Tripura, and Bagdogra in West Bengal, nil rate. Second, non-air conditioned contract carriage other than radio taxi for transportation of passengers, excluding tourism, conducted tours, charter or hire, nil rate. However, this does not apply if the service is provided through an ECO notified under Section 9(5). Third, non-air conditioned stage carriage, nil rate, again excluding ECO based services. Contract carriage means a motor vehicle hired for exclusive use at a fixed rate, whether on a time basis or point to point, without picking up other passengers en route. This includes maxi cabs and motor cabs. A radio taxi means a taxi connected to a central control office via two-way radio and equipped with GPS or GPRS for tracking. The exemption under entry 15B, non-AC contract carriage, applies to transportation on predetermined routes and schedules. It does not apply when the contract carriage is hired for a specific time period and the recipient decides the route and schedule. So, a private hire of a non-AC vehicle where you control the itinerary, that is taxable. Only standardized route-based non-AC contract carriage services are covered. Entry 16. Services to the central government for transport of passengers by air from or to a regional connectivity scheme airport. against consideration in the form of viability gap funding, nil rate. This exemption is valid for 3 years from the date of commencement of operations at the notified airport. Entry 17. Transportation of passengers by railways except first class or air-conditioned coach, metro, monorail or tramway, inland waterways, public transport in vessel within India excluding tourism, and metered cabs, auto rickshaws including e-rickshaws, all nil rate. However, if metered cabs or autos are provided through an ECO notified under section 9(5), the ECO pays the GST, not the driver. Entry 18. Transportation of goods by road, excluding services of a goods transport agency or a courier agency, and by inland waterways, nil rate. Entry 20. Transportation by rail or vessel within India of relief materials for disaster victims, defense or military equipment, newspapers or magazines, registered with the registrar of newspapers, agricultural produce, milk, salt, food grain, including flour, pulses and rice, and organic manure, nil rate. Entry 21. GT, a transportation of agricultural produce, milk, salt and food grain, including flour, pulses and rice, organic manure, registered newspapers or magazines, relief materials for disaster victims, and defense or military equipment, nil rate. A GTA is any person who provides service in relation to transport of goods by road and issues a consignment note. The consignment note is a serially numbered document issued upon receiving goods for road transport containing name of consignor and consignee, registration number of the goods carriage, details of goods, place of origin and destination, gross weight, GSTIN of the person liable for tax, and other invoice details. Both conditions must be met, providing road transport and issuing a consignment note. If either is absent, the person is not a GTA. If a transporter does not issue a consignment note, they are not a GTA. Individual truck or tempo operators who do not issue consignment notes fall outside GTA provisions. Their services qualify for the Entry 18 exemption. GTA services include not just transport but also ancillary activities like loading, unloading, packing, unpacking, transshipment, and temporary warehousing, when provided as part of the transportation service. These ancillary services are part of the composite GTA supply and taxed as a single service. However, if ancillary services are billed separately on the same or different invoice, they are treated as separate supplies and not part of the GTA service. Entry 21 1A GT, A services to an unregistered person, including an unregistered casual taxable person, nil rate. But GTA services to the following registered recipients are taxable under reverse charge mechanism: factories under the Factories Act, societies, cooperative societies, body corporates, partnership firms and AOPs, and any registered casual taxable person. Entry 21B GT, a services to a government department or establishment, a local authority or a governmental agency that is registered only for TDS purposes under section 51 and not for making taxable supplies, nil rate, no conditions. These government entities are not making taxable supplies, so they cannot take ITC. Hence, a nil rate for GTA services to them is appropriate. Entry 27 exempts at nil rate services by way of extending deposits, loans or advances where consideration is represented by interest or discount, excluding interest on credit cards, and interbank or interauthorized dealer sale or purchase of foreign currency. Important clarifications: service charges, documentation fees, broking fees, and administrative charges collected over and above the interest are not interest. They are separate taxable services. Charges for delays in loan repayment, brokerage, or margin trading are treated as interest since they arise from extending credit. Exempt. Interest on overdue credit card balances is specifically excluded from the exemption. It is taxable. Foreign exchange transactions with the general public, retail forex, are not exempt. Entry 27A. Services by banks to basic savings bank, deposit account holders under Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana nil rate, supporting financial inclusion. Entry 34. Services by an acquiring bank in settlement of transactions up to 2000 rupees in a single transaction through credit card, debit card, charge card, or other payment card. Nil rate. This encourages digital payments for small transactions. Entry 39A. Services by an intermediary of financial services located in a multi-services SEZ with IFSC status to a customer located outside India for international financial services in currencies other than Indian rupees. Nil rate. This applies to entities recognized or permitted by the Government of India or IFSC regulators. Several life insurance services are exempt at nil rate. Entry 28. Life insurance as annuities under the National Pension System regulated by PFRDA. Entry 29. Life insurance by Army, Naval and Air Force Group insurance funds for members under central government group insurance schemes. Entry 29A. Life insurance by the Naval Group Insurance Fund for Coast Guard personnel. Entry 29B. Life insurance by Central Armed Police Forces under Ministry of Home Affairs to members. Entry 36. Life insurance under specific government schemes, Janashri Bima Yojana, Aam Aadmi Bima Yojana, life micro insurance products with coverage up to 2 lakh rupees approved by IRDI, Varishta Pension Bima Yojana, PM Jeevan Jyoti Bima Yojana, PM Jan Dhan Yojana, and PM Vaya Vandana Yojana. Nil rate. Entry 35 exempts general insurance services under a long list of specified government and welfare schemes, including hut insurance, cattle insurance under SGSY, tribal insurance, Janata personal accident policy, Gramin accident policy, agricultural pump set insurance, export credit insurance restructured weather-based crop insurance scheme, RWCIS, Jan Arogya Bima Policy, Pradhan Mantri, Fasal Bima Yojana, Rashtriya Swasthya Bima Yojana, Coconut Palm Insurance, PM Suraksha Bima Yojana, Niramya, Health Insurance for Persons with Disabilities, and Bangla Shasha Bima, nil rate for all. Entry 36A. Services by way of reinsurance of any of the insurance schemes listed in entry 35, 36 or 40. Nil rate. Entry 30. Services by ESIC to persons under the Employees State Insurance Act, nil rate. Entry 31. Services by EPFO to persons under the Employees Provident Funds Act, nil rate. Entry 31. 1. A services by Coal Mines Provident Fund Organization, nil rate. Entry 31. 1. B. Services by NPS Trust to its members as an administrative fee, nil rate. Entry 37. Services by way of collecting contributions under Atal Pension Yojana, nil rate. Entry 30 ST8. Services by way of collecting contributions under any state government pension scheme, nil rate. These exemptions collectively ensure that the Social Security framework, PF, ESI and pension does not attract GST. Entry 39 exempts services by a business facilitator or business correspondent to a banking company with respect to accounts in its rural area branch, services by any person as an intermediary to a business facilitator or correspondent for those same services, and services by a business facilitator or correspondent to an insurance company in a rural area, all nil rate. This exemption supports financial inclusion by ensuring that the cost of reaching customers in rural areas through banking correspondence is not inflated by GST. Entry 41 exempts the upfront amount, whether called premium, salami, cost, price, ERMs or development charges, for long-term leases of 30 years or more of industrial plots or plots for infrastructure development for financial business provided by state government industrial development corporations or entities with 20% or more government ownership to industrial units or developers, nil rate. Conditions: the leased plots must be used only for the allocated industrial or financial activity purpose. The state government must monitor compliance. If there is any change of land use in violation, the original lessor, original lessee, and all subsequent lessees are jointly and severally liable to pay the tax that would have been due plus interest and penalty. Entry 45 exempts legal services provided by an arbitral tribunal or a partnership firm of advocates or an individual advocate other than a senior advocate to any person other than a business entity with aggregate turnover below the GST registration threshold in the preceding year, the government, including CG, SGUT, local authority, governmental authority, or government entity, nil rate. Services by a partnership firm of advocates or individual advocates to other advocates or advocate firms providing legal services are also exempt. Services by senior advocates to business entities above the threshold are taxable under RCM. Entry 53 exempts at nil rate the sponsorship of sporting events organized by a national sports federation or its affiliated federations where participating teams or individuals represent any district, state, zone or country. The Association of Indian Universities, Inter-University Sports Board, School Games Federation of India, All India, Sports Council for the Deaf, Paralympic Committee of India or Special Olympics Bharat, the Central Civil Services Cultural and Sports Board, national games under the Indian Olympic Association or events under the Panchayat, Yuva Krida or Khel Abhiyan scheme. no conditions, nil rate for all. Entry 69 exempts services provided by NSDC, NCVET, awarding bodies recognized by NCVET, assessment agencies recognized by NCVET, and training bodies accredited with NCVET for vocational skill development, including under the National Skill Development Program, Skill Certification and Monetary Reward Scheme, or any NSQF aligned qualification. Nil rate. Entry 70 exempts services by assessing bodies empaneled by the Directorate General of Training under the Skill Development Initiative Scheme. Nil rate. Entry 71 exempts services by training providers under the Deen Dayal Upadhyaya Grameen Kaushalya Yojana for skill or vocational training courses certified by NCVET. Nil rate. Entry 78 exempts at nil rate services by an artist by way of a performance in folk or classical art forms of music, dance or theatre, provided the consideration is less than 1,50,000 rupees. If the consideration meets or exceeds 1,50,000 rupees, the entire amount is taxable, not just the excess. The exemption is not available for services by the artist as a brand ambassador. Services outside the specified folk or classical forms, including Western music, modern theatre, contemporary performance art, acting in films or serials, are taxable. Visual arts like painting and sculpture are also taxable. Entry 79. Services by way of admission to a museum, national park, wildlife sanctuary, tiger reserve or zoo, nil rate. Entry 79. A. Services by way of admission to a protected monument under the Ancient Monuments and Archaeological Sites and Remains Act, 1958, or relevant state acts, nil rate. Entry 81. Services by way of right to admission to circus, dance, theatrical performance, including drama or ballet, award functions, concerts, pageants, musical performances, or any sporting event other than a recognized sporting event. Recognized sporting events and planetariums, nil rate, but only where the consideration for right to admission is 500 rupees or less per person. Above 500 rupees, it becomes taxable. Entry 77 exempts at annual rate services by an unincorporated body or non-profit entity registered under any law to its own members by way of reimbursement of charges or share of contribution. As a trade union, for carrying out any GST exempt activity, or up to 7,500 rupees per month per member for sourcing goods or services from third parties for common use in a housing society or residential complex. Entry 77. A. Exempts at nil rate services by an unincorporated body or non-profit entity engaged in welfare of industrial or agricultural labor or farmers, or promotion of trade, commerce, industry, agriculture, art, science, sports, education, social welfare, environment protection, etc. to its own members against a membership fee of up to 1,000 rupees per year. Entry 2. Transfer of a going concern, slump sale as a whole or independent part, nil rate. Entry 9. B. Supply of services associated with transit cargo to Nepal and Bhutan, nil rate. Entry 12. Renting of residential dwelling for use as residence, nil rate when rented to an unregistered person or to a proprietor of a registered proprietorship who rents in his personal capacity for his own residence and not on behalf of the business. Renting to a registered person is taxable under RCM. This exemption does not apply to student hostels, paying guest accommodations, and similar establishments. Entry 12. A. Accommodation services with supply value up to 20,000 rupees per person per month for a minimum continuous period of 90 days. Nil rate. Entry 19. Transportation of goods by aircraft from outside India to the customs station of clearance in India. Nil rate. Entry 19C. Satellite launch services. Nil rate. Entry 22 exempts giving on hire. To a state transport undertaking, a motor vehicle meant to carry more than 12 passengers, nil rate. To a local authority, an electrically operated vehicle meant to carry more than 12 passengers, nil rate. To a GTA for transportation of goods, nil rate. And a motor vehicle to a person providing transport services to students and staff of educational institutions from preschool to higher secondary level, nil rate. Entry 23. Toll charges for access to a road or bridge, nil rate. Entry 25. Transmission or distribution of electricity by an electricity transmission or distribution utility, nil rate. Entry 25. A. Incidental or ancillary services to electricity transmission and distribution, such as metering equipment on rent, meter testing, releasing new connections, shifting meters, issuing duplicate bills, nil rate. Entry 44. Services by an incubate with total turnover up to 50 lakh rupees in a financial year, provided the previous year's turnover was also under 50 lakh rupees and 3 years have not elapsed since entering the incubation agreement, nil rate. Entry 44A. R&D services against grants from a government entity or research institution notified under Section 35, 1, 2 or 3 of the Income Tax Act, nil rate. Entry 48. Services by technology business incubators or science and technology. Entrepreneurship parks recognized by NSTEDB or bio-incubators recognized by BIRAC, nil rate. Entry 49. Services by an independent journalist, Press Trust of India or United News of India for collecting or providing news, nil rate. Entry 50. Public library services for lending books, publications or knowledge enhancing content, nil rate. Entry 52. Services by an organizer to any person for a business exhibition held outside India, nil rate. Entry 52A. Tour operator services partly in India and partly outside India to foreign tourists, exempt to the extent of the value of services performed outside India. The value outside India is the lower of total consideration multiplied by days, outside India divided by total days or 50% of total consideration. Duration rule: over 12 hours counts as a full day, under 12 hours counts as a half day. Entry 57. Preconditioning, pre-cooling, ripening, waxing, retail packing, or labeling of fruits and vegetables that do not change or alter their essential characteristics, nil rate. Entry 58. Services by the National Center for Cold Chain Development for cold chain knowledge dissemination, nil rate. Entry 59. Services by a foreign diplomatic mission located in India, nil rate. Entry 61. A. Services by way of granting national permit to a goods carriage to operate throughout India or contiguous states, nil rate. Entry 65. A. Services by way of providing information under the Right to Information Act, 2005, nil rate. Entry 66. A. Services of affiliation by a central or state educational board or council to a school established or controlled by the government, governmental authority, or government entity. Nil rate. Entry 68. Services to a recognized sports body by an individual as a player, referee, umpire, coach, or team manager for a sporting event organized by the recognized sports body. Nil rate. And services by one recognized sports body to another. Nil rate. However, services by selectors, commentators, curators, and technical experts are taxable. Entry 76. Services for public conveniences such as bathrooms, washrooms, lavatories, urinals, or toilets. Nil rate. Two important final clarifications on sports exemptions. First, services by individuals such as selectors, commentators, curators, and technical experts are taxable even if rendered for events organized by recognized sports bodies. These roles are not covered by Entry 68. Second, services of a player to a franchisee that is not a recognized sports body are also taxable. The exemption is strictly limited to participation-related services, players, referees, umpires, coaches, and team managers for events organized by recognized sports bodies. And with that, students, we have completed Chapter 5, Exemptions from GST. This was a long chapter, and we have covered every category of exempt supply systematically. The key principles to always keep in mind: an exemption must be specifically notified. It does not apply automatically. The conditions attached to each entry are critical. If conditions are not met, the supply becomes taxable. And the definitions used in the entries, like educational institution, charitable activities, agricultural produce, GTA, are precise legal terms that must be correctly applied. Revise the key entries, the thresholds, and the conditions. This chapter requires careful reading rather than memorization. See you in the next chapter.